Okay. So to get into our first question here, we're going to go much more general for the whole season. One of the main words I would describe the 2024 Mariners season is disappointing. They finished with an 85-77 record. That was a few inch shorter than their 2023 campaign. So would you say this season was more or less disappointing than the 2023 season? And we'll just start, I guess, right to left or whatever direction. We'll start with Jage.
Yeah. So 2024 was worse. I tried to actually think back and put myself in the emotional place that I was in 2023 and kind of going through it and seeing us, ride the roller coaster of riding Julio's, 240 WRC plus month that he had in August, and then, watching it all fall apart in September and being just like gutted, right? But I think what helped was that there were also other sports for me that kind of kept me occupied at that time. So I was able to transition out easy. This year was harder. Just a couple of stats that I grabbed prior to this call. Outside, we obviously all know the 10 game lead was blown. That's only happened a handful of times. That one's pretty brutal as is. The AL West had the lowest winning percentage of any division in baseball. That's number two. Number three, Seattle actually went 32-20 against the division, which was tied for second of all teams against division opponents. By the way, the top seven teams that had those records, essentially 30 wins or more against their own division, were the Mets in the playoffs, the Guardians in the playoffs, the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Orioles, the Royals. The Mariners were the only team in the top seven with a 30-win record against their division to not make the postseason. They were plus 80 runs against their own division. They scored 4.5 runs and only allowed 3. But against everybody else, they were 53-57, a minus 11 run differential, barely scored 4 runs a game, gave up 4.1. And then kind of the thing that was really the biggest dagger, I felt like there was no real great team in the American League this year. I mean, you could make an argument for the Yankees and the Orioles, but they were very up and down. The Mariners went 24-36 against non-AOS teams if you remove the White Sox. Because again, I know that we don't want to necessarily always go back and forth on the White Sox and everything, but 24-36 against the AL, that's just not going to do it. And again, this team should have been better than what they were offensively. We watched a historically bad offense for 5 months. I'm sorry, about 4 months before we got to Edgar and things kind of shifted in the right direction. But I mean, it was just an unwatchable brand of baseball for a long part of the season. And that was just really difficult for me and just made this entire year, like you said, disappointing is a great word, but it was difficult. It was a chore at times to watch baseball. And that's never a position you want to be in as a fan.
For sure, for sure. We'll move on to Connor.
Yeah, the 2024 season for me was definitely more disappointing than 23. Of course, coming into 23, they had just made the playoffs for the first time in forever. So expectations were high. You did expect to make the playoffs that year. I was excited for Colton Wong and for Teoscar Hernandez. Some of those guys, you would hope that Jared Kelenic would take the next step and become the prospect that he was. And then you head into the season and you have Tommy La Stella on your roster opening day. You got AJ Pollock. You still have Marco in the rotation. So you're still hopeful, but the expectations aren't nearly as high as coming into this year, to where we all knew that the Mariners starting rotation was going to be one of, if not the best starting rotation that the Mariners have had in franchise history. They also go out and get some solid bats on paper. They go out and get Jorge Polanco, Mitch Garver, all these guys. And, on the opening day roster, you look at, hey, Ty France is batting 8. That's a pretty good problem to have. If Ty France is your eight guy, that's just telling you how deep the roster is. Add on to that the Gregory Santos trade and various other moves, and the expectations were sky high. And you kind of flipped both seasons. 2023, they didn't, around the midway point, they weren't where they wanted to be, but then they had the super hot streak when Julio got hot in August and the remainder of that year. They went 24-6 after game 100 in 2023, and they led the AL with an 818 OPS in 50 games after July 1st. Flipped it to 2024, and they start out super hot. They have a commanding lead of the division, up 10 games against the Astros. June 18th, they're up 10 games with a 91.7% chance to make the playoffs. And then they just free fall. And we thought the strikeout problem was there in 2023. It was it was on pace to be worse in 2024. You had the offseason hire of Brent Brown to be the offensive coordinator. Clearly that was not working. But then you look at the positives of this season, once Dan Wilson and Edgar Martinez were hired as coaches, their offense completely turned around and they were fourth in all of baseball in weighted runs created plus since they were hired. So overall, yeah, definitely more disappointing in 2024 than 23.
Okay, we'll keep going clockwise, so we'll go with Sean.
Yeah, I mean, 2024 for me is the most disappointing season in the history of Mariners baseball. It doesn't come close to me for 2023 because of expectations. I thought that going into 2023, I was pretty frustrated by what we didn't do going into 2023. I thought that the additions of, Pollock, the Cooper Hummels, making the opening day roster, your Tommy LaStellas. I was just really frustrated that we didn't do more. Going into 2024, I was sitting there going like, hey, Jorge Polanco, that's a big swing. Your Mitch Garver. I thought that he was going to be the closest thing that we've had since Edgar Martinez in our DH spot, and it just didn't pan out. And for me, it was just expectation because I thought going into 2024, like we can go toe to toe with anyone. I thought that I was convinced of that, and it just didn't play out. And the way that the division played out, 2023 versus 2024, it's like if you're not going to win the division in 2024, when the heck are you going to ever win the division? I mean, the Astros were riddled with injuries. Hader comes out the gate in April and is just a shell of himself. They're riddled with injuries. Tucker is injured for half the season. Verlander, they don't even have him for majority of the year. The Rangers, the defending World Series champion, they are riddled with injuries. They don't have their Simeon was kind of a shell of himself this year. They didn't have Corey Seager for the beginning of the year and a big stretch down in the middle of the season. It's like if you aren't going to win the World Series, or not the World Series, if you're not going to win the division this season, when is it ever going to happen? And 2024 for me it's a big step in terms of disappointment. 2024 is a lot bigger disappointment than 2023 for me.
Okay, moving on to Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I don't have a ton else to add. The one thing I'll say about 2024 is I enjoyed 2024 for longer. I mean, I think 2023 was so frustrating for the first 4 months. And then obviously August was great. It was a lot of August though. August, first of all, wasn't that long of a stretch, but the stretch was a lot of it was like, oh wow, like this is what we should have been doing the whole time. And by the time it was like, all right, we're rolling and we're back, they had that terrible September. So mid-April through mid-June for me this year was by far the best stretch of the two seasons. I really, really had fun watching this team kind of defy the fact they were hitting like garbage and pull win after win out. But yeah, I mean, I have a hard time looking at anything as more disappointing than 2024. I mean, Scott Service is the longest tenured manager besides Lou Piniella in the history of the franchise, and he gets canned halfway through because they play so badly from the front. So, I mean, there's nothing more disappointing than that, and obviously, encouraged by how they played at the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, 2024 was brutal in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to Brady.
All right, so by virtue of going last, I'm going to take this in a slightly different spot because everyone else has already said everything that I could probably say. And I will just say this. 2024 is more frustrating because of the missed opportunities that were in front of this team. And everybody's already named them, right? The division was weaker. The Astros were bad. The Astros were injured. You had a fully healthy pitching staff for the most part that was essentially wasted. The big moves you took that we've asked the franchise to take didn't pan out. That's incredibly frustrating. It's an incredible amount of missed opportunities that will take me a very long time as a fan to get over. That said, I'm not really in the mood to rank my heartaches. Like, we ended up in the same spot both years. You missed the playoffs by a game. They're equal. They're both frustrating, and they're frustrating for different reasons, and they were frustrating at different times, but we end up in the exact same place. the Mariners have consistently done this to all of us for the entirety of our lives. And some of us are older than others, but like I've been a Mariners fan for 34 years now. And 30 of those years, I've been disappointed at the end of them. Like this is just what happens every year with this franchise. And it comes in different packaging every year, but we end up in the same spot. So I'm not really in the mood to rank my heartbreaks, and I'm not really in the mood to think about which one was worse. They missed the playoffs by one game in 2 consecutive years. They had opportunities in both years to make the playoffs and didn't. And this year, they went 5-8 against the Angels. They got beaten series by the Nationals, Marlins, and Pirates. Like we can complain about Scott and Jerry and the moves and all we want and Stanton and the money. This team should have still been in the playoffs. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The team as constructed, as much as we want to complain about everybody involved in it, still should have been in the playoffs. But they got beat by the Marlins, the Pirates, and the Nationals and went 5-8 against the Angels. And that's what kept them out.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's kind of weird because I'm in a different situation than a lot of people because, I'm more of a newer Mariners fan. This is the second full year that I've even really been watching, every single game and paying attention to what's going on. And my first time, or my first year making content around it and really, diving that deep into it. But yeah, it's like with 2023, it's hard because they had the good August, but yeah, it was like the rest of the year was just kind of mediocre at best. Whereas this year, the on paper, the team was just a lot better than they were in 2023. And it was, you had so many guys just have career down years. And, it's like if the people who say on social media, like that they guessed, Garver was going to be bad, or surprise, Jorge Polanco, he turned 30 and he became bad. It's like, you didn't guess that. You're like, that's ridiculous. It's just absurd that this, every year it feels like, and especially the last couple of years, you get these new guys and this year, especially guys who have the, resume to back him up. And you look at Garver, he's had up and down years. When he's had those up years, he has been one of the better hitters in like all of baseball for the most part. And Jorge Polanco has been a solid, 118 WRC plus guy for over a decade practically. So you can't predict those things, and just feels like what this was the best opportunity to win the division. With Houston the way it was. Now, I don't know what's going to look like next year. I don't know how much Houston's going to be able to do this winter either. Who knows what Texas is going to do? They definitely have the money for, to do whatever they want probably, but just really disappointing for sure. Now we'll go not as broad, we'll go specific to a player here. We're going to talk about Julio Rodriguez. He is the cornerstone and the franchise player here. He had a down year in 2024, which is weird to say. He still had a 2020 season, so I want to give him credit for that. Ends the year with a slash line of 273, 325, 409 for a 116 WRC plus. Just simply not as much production as we have seen in his first 2 years in the league. So now that he's kind of got that slump year hopefully out of the way, I just want to know what is everyone's expectations for Julio going into 2025, and what are we hoping to see from him to hopefully signal he's taken that next step in his career to become that player that I think most of us can agree we think he can be. This time we'll go the opposite way, and we'll start with Brady.
Fair expectation for Julio is to expect him to be a top 10 MVP candidate. I don't necessarily need him to win it, but a top 10 MVP candidate is a fair expectation. I'm okay with him hitting 275 for the season, but what would I like to see? I would like to see him hit consistently 275. I don't need him to hit 220 one month and 375 the next month, and I don't need to see him hit 180 one month and 480 the next month. I would like him to be consistent all the way throughout, top 10 MVP finisher. I think it's completely fair to expect him to be 30-30 every year for the foreseeable future.
Okay, we'll move on to Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest thing about Julio this year is it's obvious that he's not a guy that at just 23 years old, he's going to be able to just like succeed incredibly regardless of circumstance. And the Mariners need to be more intentional about creating a circumstance where he can succeed. That said, I'm not long-term concerned. I think it's pretty clear that the situation that they created for him to begin the year was not one where he enjoyed and thought was positive for his development and his ability to hit. And I think by the time that that situation had been cleared out and he got healthy, it was very obvious that they had exercised that situation and brought in a different situation that he was more amenable to. So if they are able to, train their focus on creating a situation that's positive for him that helps him thrive, I don't think 6-7 WAR is going to be difficult for him to reach at all. And obviously he took a step back in that regard this year, and he wasn't a very good hitter for 3-4 months, but I'm not worried about him at all long term, and I think he's going to continue to be underpaid as he has been for every year of his career. 15 WAR for 15 million so far in his career. So I think he's right on the right track. And I'm not worried about him whatsoever. He's still an outlier performer, even though he had a step back this year.
Yep. Okay, moving on, Sean.
So I want to give you guys Julio Rodriguez OPS. I know OPS is not a perfect stat, but just by month. And it's a very similar thing in 2023. So 625 was his OPS in April, 688 in May, 574 in June, 1,122 was his OPS in July, drops back down to 713 in August, and then we jump back up to basically 900 in September. So what I want to see from Julio is less of a roller coaster. Like you're going to have hot months and you're going to have dips, but like we can't crater down to 600 and pop up to, 1.1. Like we need to see a more consistent hitter. And as far as expectations, like I'm going to be honest, I don't think that it's fair to expect it at this point for Julio Rodriguez to be what Bobby Witt Jr. was this year. I think that he could be. Like I think he has the talent to be, but do I think that it's realistic for us to be like, all right, this is a 9-10 WAR player? I mean, the comparisons to Acuna have always been there. I just don't think that is realistic to expect at this point. Now, I think he could do it, but I think more realistically, Julio Rodriguez is going to be somewhere around a, you know, 5-6 WAR player, which is amazing. Like that's amazing. Like, that can be your best player on your team. Um, have an 800 to 850 OPS, but I just want to see it a little more steady, or I should say a lot more steady. We the craters, the dips, it's like, you can't have your number 2 hitter for months at a time with a 600 OPS, 650 OPS. That's just not going to work. And it makes it to where our offense is stuck in the mud. We see these games where we strike out 15 times a game because Julio Rodriguez is getting golden sombreros, consistently. It's like, all right, well, let's the high, not to sound like Scott Service here, but can we not have the highs be so high and the lows be so low? Don't get too high, don't get too low. That's what Scott Service would always say. Can we do that with Julio? Can we be a little more steady? That's what I'm looking for in 2025 from Julio Rodriguez.
Okay, moving on to Connor.
Yeah, with Julio for 2025, like you guys mentioned, the consistency. It's not, completely perfect, but the team kind of goes how Julio goes. He's not the entire team, but it seems that when he's performing, that is contagious, and the rest of the team kind of picks up off of that. I don't know how much of a clubhouse type leader verbally he is, but clearly, with his play when he's performing, it's rubbing off on the team. So, I mean, for me, if he's 130 weighted runs created plus or higher, there was 25 guys last year that were a 130 or higher WRC plus. I mean, I could see him being a 30-30 guy every year. And I think it's realistic to expect that from him, especially with his ability and what he's getting paid and the contract and all that. But more consistency, and I'm not expecting MVP every year, but 30% better than league average or better at least.
Yep. Okay, moving on to Jades.
Yeah, there's really not much more that I can add. I mean, obviously, consistency has been a common trend here. Dating back to 2023. He's had 7 months below 110 WRC plus. He's had 5 months above 110 WRC plus. The problem, as Sean brought up, is that 4 of those months of the below 110s, have actually been below 80. He's been a completely non-competitive player. I mean, his again, as Patrick alluded to, his 3-month stretch this year, by WRC plus, Julio was one of the worst 5 outfielders in baseball. It was bad. Like there are always silly questions and comments when they come up online of the, oh, well, why can't they just send him down to Tacoma to go work on some things? Like, yeah, that's not realistic. That's not how this works. But that being said, kind of to Sean's point with the roller coaster piece and the really, really lows, I think Julio's growth doesn't necessarily come from his, inability to slump anymore. Everyone slumps. I think his is going to be not letting his valleys get so low, and that's really been the hardest part for him. Like, it's okay to slump, but I think what really troubles me with Julio, and this will lead into my last point, is that again, I love how he plays the game. I love the joy. We didn't see a lot of the joy this year. I think this was one of the first times we actually saw um, not happy Julio. It was just like, I'm here for work. I mean, if you even remember the quotes again, maybe it was just taken out of context. But again, after Scott was fired, one of the comments from Julio was, "Listen, I'm just an employee." That was kind of a guy that did not enjoy playing baseball this year, and it was very evident. And when Julio's not having fun, it definitely affects him. But kind of leading into that last point, August and September, Julio. And I think I alluded to it on Twitter or made the joke once where I basically said, pissed off Julio is a problem. And we need more of that. I've said it in our Discord channel. We need more Helio, to use the wrestling term of face and a heel. We need the bad guy Julio a lot more. It just feels like when he is, his same bubbly self, but he's in those slumps and he's just trying to work his way through it. I mean, there are just full-blown non-competitive at-bats. I mean, how many times can you guys remember even this year where he goes up, pitcher throws 5 balls, Julio swung at all 5 and struck out? Like that happened multiple times this year. And you're just like, I know you're working through things, but this isn't even competitive baseball right now. You're just up there hacking, trying to hit your way through it. And the fact that no one was really able to get to him early enough, again, to Patrick's point that he brought up earlier of just, you really wish that they're going to be very intentional on how to make sure that Julio doesn't get down into these valleys where he just can't get out of them. We need competition from him at every AB, because that's how the roster is built. When Julio goes, the team goes. If he's having non-competitive games, those are the days we're getting non-competitive offensive outputs from us. So the consistency is big, but I just want to see him take every AB. Again, I know you can't do it over the course of a season, 750 plate appearances of trying to treat it like a playoff AB, but I definitely need to see less of the 5 swings on 5 pitches out of the zone and ending with a strikeout. Like, I really can't see that anymore.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it was nice to see him feel like he was coming into his own at the end of the season. So hopefully he can kind of keep that going. I don't know if that's an Edgar thing. I don't know if that's a Randy, Justin Turner thing. Like it certainly seems like he really enjoys having those veteran presences in his clubhouse. So hopefully they can give him one if that's what seems to be working, because we definitely need it. For me, as far as things I hope to see next year, I kind of more of an because you guys said everything as far as the performance on the field stuff. I would like to see, and I was getting a little frustrated this year, especially when he was having his rough patches or the team was having their rough patches. Every time I would see a reporter be like, Julio refused to answer questions, that type of thing. That was frustrating for me, because he's a franchise player, he's your franchise cornerstone, you were paying him, not now, but you are going to be paying him a lot of money when it comes to the end of this contract. I would like to see kind of a bit more of that coming into a leadership role. And I understand he's really young, so I get that he's not there, or at least wasn't there this year. And I'm not expecting him to be the absolute leader of the clubhouse like you have, we're watching the Padres in the playoffs right now, like a Manny Machado or someone like that. I just want to see that step up of him being more of a voice in that clubhouse and more at the forefront, even when things aren't going great. Because it feels like that's the only time we ever see him really do an interview, and he's on MLB Network when he is, crushing the ball and the team is playing well. I would like to see a bit more of that from him when things maybe aren't as good next year. So, otherwise though, I do agree. I probably think a 30 for 30 season is probably in the realm of possibility there. Hopefully he stays healthy for the whole time as well. Moving on to another player yesterday, Jeff Passan broke the news that Jorge Polanco underwent surgery on the patellar tendon in his knee. The hope is he'll be back for spring training, but that sounds like a pretty hopeful time frame, so I doubt it. This injury does explain a bit of his production decrease for last year. He ended up slashing 213, 296, 355 for a 92 WRC plus on the season. He is going to be having a club option for $12 million with a $750,000 buyout if they do not pick it up. So now the ending the debate pretty much, are you guys going to be picking up that option for Polanco? And if not, what is your solution for second base coming into next year? We'll go back in the clockwise thing here with Jage.
First of all, the option is an absolute non-starter, so I'm just going to get that one out of the way. 12.5 million for, and again, I like Polanco, the player. I also have seen this song and dance before. We're not paying $12 million on a limited budget for a player that hasn't put up a 2 F4 seasons since 2021. We're just not doing that. And if you want to build this roster to be competitive, Jorge Polanco with that option cannot be on your roster. Now, if you want to have a conversation with Jorge Polanco, especially given the surgery now, and say, hey, we'll give you, since he is getting and again, I'm thinking through it as the Stanton mindset here, he's getting $750K from the Mariners regardless for the buyout. Offer him 3.25 with some incentives on a 1-year deal with the idea that, hey, if he's healthy by spring, sure, Polanco could be your guy that's starting there. But anything more than that, no, I'm really not interested. And as for a solution, listen, is it realistic to expect that Cole Young's going to come right up? Probably not. But as we've kind of discussed, again, if this team's biggest issues, right, were the ABs just being completely non-competitive, there is a risk of having that with Cole Young in a year one, right? Especially with his age, the fact that he'd be making the jump that he's making, skipping AAA completely. Again, this isn't uncommon with what the Mariners do when they love a prospect and think that they're ready. That said, his defensibility, his base running, and his ability to essentially draw walks, take pitches. Again, minor league numbers are always going to be more inflated. Once he sees better pitching, his walk rate will probably naturally go down. But regardless, there's probably, I'd say at worst, a coin flip chance that Cole Young and Jorge Polanco are neck and neck in F4 next year, regardless of where they are. Whether it's playing for the Mariners, whether one's for the Mariners and one is not. Defense and base running alone, Cole Young's probably a 2-WAR player next year. Probably. As long as his bat's not so incredibly unplayable that he can't be here. His ability to draw walks, his ability to work hard ABs, the power doesn't necessarily need to be there right now. But honestly, I'd rather roll with him. I'd rather potentially give, April to Ryan Bliss. And if Cole Young's off to a hot start, there you go. I mean, hell, if Michael Arroyo just goes to Arkansas next year and just starts ripping the face off the ball, maybe that's all of a sudden hey, maybe this guy is just an unrated prospect and he's just going to hit at every level he goes to. So I think there are options that you can look at. I just really don't think Polanco's one unless you're planning on renegotiating a much lower AAV on a 1-year bounce back deal with some incentives. But honestly, I don't want to see a number higher than what they gave Stanek.
Okay, moving on to Connor.
I personally would pick up the option of Jorge Polanco just so that it gives you that runway to be able to work in a Cole Young or a Ryan Bliss. Jorge Polanco, you look at his career up to this point, and he's been like a 15 to 20% above league hitter, a 269 switch hitter up to this point. And it's also a tough thing because he's already been in this ballpark for a year. So you would hope that he's able to make some of the adjustments that he learned playing in the ballpark this year. Whereas some of the new guys, if they were to go get a free agent, which it's not going to happen, or if they were to bring a guy up through their system, would have to deal with some of those things, but he already knows what to expect. it's promising to hear that the surgery was, one of the big issues, or fixing one of those big issues in his knee. And that explains why he was basically the worst second base defensive guy regular in baseball, and also his offensive production, specifically from the left side of the plate. So I personally, if it was my money, I'd pick it up. And if they want to be the most competitive that they can be heading into 2025, I think they have to, but will they? Probably not.
Okay, moving on, Sean.
I think picking up Polanco's option would be absolutely crazy. I think it'd be borderline reckless. I think that if you really want Polanco, you could get him for half the price. So just decline the option. And if you offer Polanco $7 million, $6 million, he's going to take that. I don't want anything really to do with him next year, because that injury that he has is about a 6-month injury at the best. So that you're going to be talking about, is he even going to be ready for opening day? And by the time he's ready to rock and roll, here comes Cole Young. So I don't really want that as part of our future plans. I want more resources poured into third base and DH. And if I'm being completely honest, the injury news, I know a lot of people were kind of, I don't know if rooting on Polanco or justifying the season he had. Honestly, it pissed me off. It's okay to play hurt. You can't play injured, though. And if you're out there a shell of yourself, you should not be playing. And it explains a lot, sure, but it also it pisses me off, because you cannot play with the injury he had, and it shows. I mean, it's obvious now. Hindsight's 2020. It's obvious, but yeah, I would say good riddance to Polanco, and my plan would be probably to roll with Bliss opening day, and when Cole Young is ready to rock and roll, bring him up and let him have every day at bats, probably hitting 8th for us. And like I said, I want to see resources poured more into third base than middle infield.
Okay, moving on to Patrick.
Yeah, I'm a noted Bliss Young guy for this. I also think potentially maybe Josh Rojas is tendered and hangs around and could be interesting at second base. Obviously he was great at third this year. But like Sean said, I think third base would be the place that I would be most interested to see them invest resources in. So yeah, I was a Polanco no on the option, even when he was like really hot in August, only because I was like, okay, now he's getting to a point where you can sort of start to see the story, but I need to see him finish the story. And then like he had the worst 3 weeks of his season, like right after that. And so I was just like, I can't. And like, I get that there is potential for him to be like a really good hitter for a second baseman if he can kind of keep it together. He struggles with injuries. It's kind of been a thing from his whole career. His defense has been so bad for like so long, and like obviously his defense was way worse because of the knee. Like the dude could not move on to ground balls for a lot of it, for a lot of the second half of the year. But yeah, I ultimately with the really good stretches, he still only gave you just above 0 F4. So I just think you've got Cole Young. He might not be up on opening day, but you've also got Ryan Bliss, and you've also got Leo Rivas, and you've also potentially got Josh Rojas. I think it makes the most sense, given that obviously that their budget's probably not going to be over 160 million, that they should stick with the cheap Young option there. And I just don't think it's such a risk to try to expect Polanco to contribute in the way that they were envisioning it in the first place, especially just another year on the timeline, another surgery. And it's like, I'm just not, I guess I can see why it makes sense, but I'm just a no.
Okay, moving on to Brady.
I hate that we're having this talk because it's so much about money. Like, the answer to this is pick up Polanco's option. Hope, like Connor said, that year 2 in the system, year 2 in the ballpark, he's made the adjustments. and then go out and do enough things so that Polanco can hit 8th instead of 2nd, and you're not counting on him in the same way. Like, that's what the answer should be. But the problem is that the Mariners don't operate that way, and because they don't operate that way, we're all going to have to say they have to decline it because they can't afford to pay a guy to be, a $12 million 8-hitter, even though $12 million isn't that much money. As for what I would do otherwise, I don't want to give Ryan Bliss the first month of the season. They got 13 of their first 17 games at home next year, and they need to go out and go 12-5 in them and not 5-12. And I would like them to be incredibly competitive in April so that hopefully they can build a big lead again and this time not blow it. What would I like them to do instead of Polanco? I'd like them to go get Hassan Kim. I'd like them to go get Willy Adames. Two things they're not going to do because they cost too much money, unfortunately. So the answer is probably no, because he didn't play well enough and he is older and they do need to save the money. But I can promise you that Jorge Polanco is going to go play somewhere else next year in a more hitter-friendly environment, play 130 games, and hit 268 with 19 home runs and 74 RBIs. And we're all going to get on Twitter the next day and say, see, they could have had him for the right price of $12 million. See, they could have done it. It's going to be the Teoscar Hernandez thing all over again. So it's probably a no. It probably should be a no because of the money. But as for what they should do, Adames or Kim, they're not going to do either of them.
Yeah. I definitely go ahead. If you had something to say, Patrick, you can go ahead. It's up to you.
I was just going to say that if they could get the two slow old guys off the roster, and you guarantee me that, because Polanco is actually potentially like intriguing as a DH type. I'm kind of done watching him play second base. But I don't think you can probably get both of the Mitches off the roster, in which case I don't really think you can have a Polanco, especially if, people are talking about re-signing Justin Turner. You just can't have that many slow, old, unathletic guys on the team. And they need to be more athletic this year.
Yeah.
How about Adames at second, Crawford at short, and Polanco plays third? Are you in agreement with that, Patrick?
If we were living in a Willy Adames world, I would love it. But we don't live in Willy Adames world here. And
No,
also, I don't know, Willy Adames is a really streaky player who plays awesome defense, but I don't know. He'd be great, but he's going to cost $25 million, and they probably can give him about 10. So no.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's, I kind of agree with just not giving him his option, but seeing if you can get him back for cheaper than that. But my thing with second base too is like, I mean, if we can get a solid third base, get a solid DH of some kind, it's like second base is one of those positions where you can kind of get away with them not being like the best hitter necessarily. So I don't necessarily know what the solution is per se, but there's just so many different options. So I liked being able to hear everyone's kind of different point of view, and especially not being able to, not everyone agreeing with each other. That's what we're here for. So, I like the variance of opinion there. So next we're going to move on to the starting rotation, which was elite last year. They threw 92 quality starts, and viewers do not go see how many of those they won. The offense is clearly what needs to be upgraded the most this winter, but it's been discussed due to cheap ownership that we may need to leverage one of our starting pitchers in a trade to get a good bat back. Do you think that will happen this year? And if so, who do you think is most likely to go? We will start with Brady here.
I don't think it's likely to happen. I could see them trading Emerson Hancock, so I could see them dealing the 6th of those guys, but I don't think any of the top 5 will get dealt. If they were going to deal one of the top 5, I would deal Castillo, not because I want to, because simply put, it saves you the most money up front, right? Dealing Castillo saves you basically $24 million, a little less than that. It might be $23 million per year starting next year. He's the oldest. He has the most tread on the tires. He is the most expensive. I understand with that probably becomes a lesser return, but since this is so much about money, if I have to trade one of them, I would trade Castillo. I don't want to trade Gilbert, but it has been noted that Gilbert also has an incredibly high max effort delivery. So the idea of him breaking down is probably not unfair to think of either. Miller and Wu certainly throw more freely, although Wu has had the injury issues himself. I would choose Castillo solely for the basis on age and money, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Hancock gets dealt before any of those guys.
Okay, moving on to Patrick.
Yeah, I agree. Unlikely that they trade any of them. Castillo would be probably the most interesting one for me in terms of like trading, but I don't think it's realistic. Um, and I think you've got to probably stick by guys that sign extensions with you too, to a certain extent. Although I could definitely see them trading him next year. Um, I think they
Steel
roll
also has a no trade clause. Just saying, I
yeah,
did not mention that. And there you go.
through I believe January 1st, 2026. He has a full no trade throughout the entire off season through next season. So yeah, harder to trade him. I think it would be like the best baseball move of the five to trade him, but I still don't think it's a good baseball move necessarily because I think to what that source in the Adam Jude article said, I just don't think they're gonna get something that will make trading him worth it unless they're truly salary dumping him, which would be kind of crazy. Um, so yeah, but I'm definitely intrigued by the idea of trading one of the four young guys for like very specifically some of the Orioles players, if that ends up being a match, or less specifically the Cardinals kind of young-ish guys that they have bopping around. And the Cardinals will be motivated to make moves because Mozeliak is kind of getting retired out and Heim Bloom's taking over, so he could probably be amenable to a move like that. But I think it's an interesting concept, but to me, the organization is so risk averse. They value their really good young pitchers so much. I don't see it happening. Although I do think it is a super potentially compelling way to make the offense better, especially in the long term.
Okay, moving on, Sean.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to trade a starter, and it's not because I don't think it's a good idea. I think it you don't want me to be the GM of the Mariners, but I think that it makes a lot of sense. The Mariners right now remind me of like a NFL team that has a loaded defense but can't score points, and you just end up losing. It's like a classic 7-9, or I guess it'd be now, uh, yeah, like a 7-10 team with the way the schedule is now. But just a classic team that can't score but has a good defense. Like that's the way that I would describe the Mariners. They've got a loaded pitching staff, but we can't score runs. And I don't think we're going to trade a pitcher, and it's because Jerry Dipoto said we're not. And usually we can trust what Jerry Dipoto says. He's not like John Stanton, where got to take it with a grain of salt. When Jerry Dipoto talks, usually he speaks the truth. So I don't think we're going to trade a pitcher. If we were to trade one, I think Luis Castillo is the obvious one to me. What makes the most sense? Like Brady said, it sheds the most salary. It would probably line up if you were to get an impact back where you could take on that impact player salary. I don't think there's a player that makes any sort of sense for trading Gilbert or Kirby, and certainly not for Miller or Wu. There's just not that player that you could get back that lines up with the same amount of control, similar contracts. Like that player just doesn't exist for those four younger pitchers. It does for Castillo, and we could rattle off a few, but um, I think Castillo makes the most sense. I don't think it's going to happen simply because Jerry said it's not.
Okay, moving on to Connor.
Yeah, I hope to God they don't trade anyone out of their starting rotation. I mean, they have the best starting rotation in franchise history and potentially the league. When your 4 and 5 guys have a sub 3 ERA and a sub 1 WHIP, I mean, it's just ridiculous the quality of guys that they have. Um, Kind of following on to what you guys have been saying, if they did trade a starting pitcher, I would agree Luis Castillo because it does free up the money to go spend it elsewhere. Assuming that they're not able to trade Castillo because of the no trade clause. Um, I mean, I really hope that they wouldn't have to do it, but I would say to trade Logan because you potentially could get the most out of it, and it extends the runway potentially 2 years more than if you were to trade like a Bryce Miller. And Logan Gilbert this year led the majors in innings pitched and WHIP, so he's extremely valuable. Again, I hope they don't trade him, but you might be able to get the most out of him. Yeah, let's hope that they can sign some of these guys to long-term extensions.
Okay, and moving on to Jage. You're muted.
Yeah, of course I am. No, they're not going to trade anyone from the rotation. I know Brady mentioned the no trade clause. Patrick, you're right, obviously runs through January 1, 2026. Just a reminder though, they did the same thing to Robbie Ray. He had that no TC all the way up until January 1st. They traded him, I believe, on January 3rd. So very, very, very targeted. It very well could have just been a conversation that was, hey, we agree. Okay, awesome. We have to wait a couple of days, then we'll talk. So the one thing I also want to bring up about the Castillo contract, everyone's kind of made the same comment. It's like, oh yeah, it's 3 years, it's 72 million. It's really not that bad of a deal. It isn't. Very fair market value. Obviously, a great contract, has worked out well for the first 2 years. Is everybody forgetting about that $25 million vesting option that exists at the end of that deal? If Castillo throws 180 innings in 2027, now that is a big year. He would have to be healthy in 2027 to achieve it. However, it is there. And that's one of those things where, again, we see it all the time. Pitchers pitch well when they want to get paid. Jordan Montgomery had a hell of a year and turned that into a nice little contract for himself. And now we're getting the GM of that actual team complaining about it. So I think with Castillo too, it's a lot harder to trade him, not just because the no trade clause, but also that vesting option. I mean, it becomes essentially a 4-year, $100 million deal that you'd be giving to a pitcher who's going to be in his 32-year-old season in 2025. Again, he's been relatively healthy for the majority of his career. I kind of trust that Jude comment from the article today, where it was kind of like, yeah, Castillo's actually probably going to be the most difficult one out of that group to trade, not just because of the money, but again, he is 32. Like, it's not like he's old for a pitcher, but he's got some miles. He's thrown a lot of innings in his career so far. So, and again, I agree on the comment too, to an extent that you're really not going to probably find the player for Kirby or Gilbert. I do think the players are there for Brian Wu and Bryce Miller, but the problem is they won't want Brian Wu or Bryce Miller. They will want Logan Gilbert or George Kirby for those bats. So a perfect example, I don't think it's that horrible of an evaluation of a Bryce Miller, Jordan Westbrook style trade. They're going to say no to Jordan Westbrook. If it's Bryce Miller, they would say yes if it was Logan Gilbert. That's kind of the hard part, is they are all, in a sense, a bunch of twos, really, really good twos. Yeah, I mean, we always see the argument online of who's the Mariners ace. It doesn't matter who the Mariners ace is. All of them can be aces on any given night. Who cares? But the problem is, though, is there is definitely you see Kirby and Gilbert have those extra years of performance already. They've done it a couple of extra times. They have the more innings. They've shown their health. Brian Wu obviously has a long checkered history with his health. Hopefully we saw the better version of him at the end of this year. Bryce Miller has been consistent. He's also not necessarily the youngest either. He's going to be a little bit high up. Bryce Miller is one of those perfect examples of a guy that's going to get screwed over by Major League Baseball's current payment structures, because he's going to hit free agency at 31? Like, that for him is kind of a bummer. Like, that's kind of why I still believe Bryce Miller is probably the most likely to get extended by the Mariners, because he's truly in a weird spot where if he has any injury in his late 20s, he's kind of going to get hurt on his first potential big payday. So yeah, it's just, again, I don't think any of them get traded. If I would, it would be Castillo. But again, his no trade also makes it difficult, because even if you want to do a money swap for a player, again, somebody like an Arenado, if that was something they'd be interested in, I would be all ears to listen to it. The problem is, pretty sure Luis Castillo has no interest in going to a team that has basically stated they are going to be doing things differently, which to me sounds a little bit like a step back, not a rebuild. Kind of sounds a little similar in St. Louis. So I don't know if that's somewhere Luis Castillo would choose to go to if they were to try to have that conversation. So again, it would probably be Castillo. But I don't think any of them are realistic. I do agree with Brady. I think Emerson Hancock could potentially get dealt. My big concern there, though, is I think Emerson Hancock provides you more value than he provides value for other teams in Major League Baseball. If you were telling me Emerson Hancock is going to go be somebody's 4 or 5 starter, I'd say that's not a very good rotation. Emerson Hancock, serviceable. I like him. He's been he's had a negative F4 for his career in his starts. He's been fine, but I don't think there's a value of him being in somebody's starting five this year.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The only comment I was going to make is it just, it kind of sucks the fact that I have to write that as a prompt as something that is relevant to the conversations around the team in general. And I'm probably going to have, you know, it's
That's
going
the
to be
most interesting question of the offseason, I think. I mean,
yeah.
it is a bummer that it is, but I do think it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the most compelling
Well,
story they have.
I agree, because again, they have objectively stated as well, they are open for business. That has been the rumor that has been floated out there, that they're not saying no to anybody. Like, if it's a real conversation, they're gonna listen outside of Julio. Like, they're gonna listen, and probably Cal, Julio and Cal, but pretty much if you got a phone call on anybody, they're probably listening from Colt Emerson all the way to Randy. It does not matter. They're gonna listen on anybody if it's the right call.
Thing I would say too is like we don't always have to make the money match up. Not everybody is like the Mariners. A lot of them are, but the money doesn't always have to add up. Like the Red Sox only have $105 million in payroll commitments next year. The Red Sox have $105 million in payroll commitments. They could take on Castillo's whole deal, send the Mariners Tristan Casas, and he could play first base for the Mariners for the next 4 years or whatever. Like, whether you like that or not, everybody can make that work money wise. It saves the Mariners money, and the Red Sox can greatly afford to take on that money as well.
I agree with you. My point was kind of my face was more towards my comment about trying to trade Bryce Miller for Jordan Westberg. If you called the Red Sox on Tristan Casas, in my opinion, they don't want Luis Castillo. They want Bryce Miller, or they want Logan
Yes,
Gilbert.
they might. Absolutely.
And I don't think Castillo even, like, I think their conversation with us, and again, it's because of how the Red Sox, I know we're both familiar with the Red Sox org pretty well, how they're operating now. They have said they're going to spend more. I'm sure they would love to not have Yoshida on that roster anymore.
Yeah.
They would probably say, yeah, we'll take Luis if we give you Yoshida, and maybe we'll throw in a prospect. Like, that's kind of, I think that's more likely from Boston. I don't think you can get Cassis for anything less than, to be honest, I don't think you get Cassis for less than Logan. I think that's their ask, because he makes a lot of sense, a lot of sense for this roster.
But he's out of favor in Boston. Pro
He
tip.
is. He is. I saw the Boston Globe article today that should they trade Tristan Cassis?
Okay, so we're gonna spin this into more a bit of a positivity break here. So although we don't know the final roster of the 2025 Mariners, what are some of the positive things we are looking forward to for next season? We will go to Brady to start out with on this one.
I only have one answer. More Victor Robles. A full season of Victor Robles. That's what I'm most excited about. Like, that was like the biggest positive of 2024 was Victor Robles coming out of nowhere, becoming this great baseball story, like this Disney movie type thing where he's a top prospect, he's a World Series champion, then he's a cast-off, then he's barely playing. His first game with the Mariners, he dropped the fly ball routinely in Oakland, and then all of a sudden he becomes an incredible defensive player. He steals 30 bases for them. He hits a couple of home runs, and he's the one guy on this roster who played with spunk all year. I mean, I forget who it was who said we didn't see like fun Julio this year. We didn't see fun Julio. We didn't see fun JP. Like, the guys who smile on this team weren't really smiling a whole lot. Victor Robles never stopped smiling. A full year of Victor Robles. Give it to me in 2025.
Nice. Okay.
I'm just going to say that Victor Robles on Sunday Night Baseball was probably one of the most enjoyable experiences as a Mariners fan in 2024. Just that one game was just, was that also the 10-0 Mets game?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was the greatest game all year. Like, nothing paled in, like, that was the game. It was all Victor.
We ended the Mets season and somehow they're in the NLCS. I don't know how that's possible because we killed them. I don't understand that.
We killed the Mets, and we killed the Mets, but got brought back to life by the Tigers, I guess.
Yeah. Oh man.
Okay, moving on to Patrick for the question.
Specifically, I'm gonna say the minor leagues producing value in 2025, because it did almost nothing in 2024. Troy Taylor was a great story down the stretch. If you look at the minor league rookies that debuted on the Mariners this year, it was zero productivity for the most part. And on top of that, we had to watch a bunch of veterans produce under replacement level for most of the year. So I am excited to see some young players that come out of the strength of this organization, which is their drafting and prospect development. Geez, I still got my word. Prospect development. And I'm excited to see impact from young guys next year. I think they have a ton of potential help on both sides of the ball from their high minors guys next year. And I think Cole Young's the one in particular I want to see have an impact, but I think you could get it from 7 or 8 different guys that played AA, AAA last year.
Okay, moving on, Sean.
I'm really excited to see Matt Brash again. I tell you what, I don't know when that's happening, but man, I missed him so much this year. So that's my very simple answer. Can I say a non-Mariners thing I'm excited for,
Sure.
other than hot dogs from heaven? I'm really excited, like weirdly excited to see the A's. I don't even know what they're calling them, playing in that AAA stadium. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna be fascinated by that. Like I don't know what to expect, but it's gonna be really weird seeing, the Yankees come into town and they're playing in the Sacramento River Cat Stadium. Like that is gonna be so weird. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna be completely honest. I'm looking forward to it. One last thing, and this is more baseball in general. I'm really looking forward to those awful uniforms getting out of here with the small letters and the small name and the see-through pants. Like, get those things out of here. Look good, play good. I'm excited for the uniforms to go back the way they were, looking the way that a baseball uniform should. Because there's nothing better than a baseball uniform, that's clean. Opening day looking good. It just wasn't it this year. So I'm looking forward to the baseball uniforms going back.
Understandable. Okay, Connor, go ahead.
Next year, I'm looking forward to a full season of Dan and Edgar. Up until the point to where they were both hired, the Mariners were 30th in batting average with a 216, 26 in on-base percentage, 27th in runs scored. From August 23rd through the end of the season, they were 3rd overall in weighted runs created plus as a team with a 125. They were 8th in batting average, 4th in on-base percentage, 5th in runs scored. Clearly, the addition of those guys, Edgar talking to the hitters about their approach. Sure, there was Justin Turner and other factors that helped, but I think it did make a difference, and I'm excited to see kind of how this team is ran next year. Less analytics and more feel for the game, and just back to the basics.
Okay, and Jage.
Yeah, a few things. Probably on the major league roster, whether or not Luke Raley and Victor Robles are 450 PA type guys, because they kind of need to be. If they're not, there's nothing this team's doing this offseason that's going to be able to save the roster. Those guys are penciled to be middle top lineup bats. They're going to be penciled to be, again, Raley might see even more than that. It depends on how they address first base, whether or not they're going to use him as a platoon, whether or not they're going to try to get him into the outfield more, maybe DH Randy a little bit more to get Randy out of the outfield, because his defense is basically the Fernando Rodney experience of outfield. So if we're going to see more of Randy on the DH side, I'm going to be happy with that. I also, to echo Patrick's point, for a while at the beginning of the year, I was kind of tracking the minor league stats and kind of how they were going over 2-week periods, till it got a little burdensome, but also kind of everybody got hurt at once. That was when Farmelo went down and Colts went down again, and we're just like, oh great, we're just not going to be able to see any of our big name guys this year. But what was fun about that was seeing the development really of like Michael Arroyo, right? Like, again, Laz ended up figuring it out as he went along when he got up to Modesto, but there was no transition period for Arroyo. Arroyo just went there and just kept going. I'm not surprised they gave Laz the minor league hitter of the year, but I'm sorry, it was Arroyo. The dude jumped a level and did not stop.
Stop
Yeah.
the steal.
He got better.
Yeah. He got better. Like
Yeah.
what he did was incredible. And again, if you go look back at what he did as a 17-year-old in the system, I know we've kind of seen what, and sorry if I got the name wrong, Dwell Joseph. Do not look up his numbers for being one of the highest international free agents that the Mariners have ever signed. Do not go look up what he did stateside or in his first year of pro ball, because it was not pretty. Michael Arroyo was not much better. So that's what gives me a little bit of hope down that line. But also wondering whether or not Cole Young's gonna, impact this roster. I'm pretty high on Cole Young, mostly because of the emotional side of things. The kid went to high school down the street from where I live, which is really exciting. So being able to see him succeed on the team would be a lot of fun. And honestly, a big question for me for 2025, and something I'm really looking forward to is I do want to see what they're going to do with the roster this year. I am very looking forward to, seeing how much is John Stanton really going to actually try to pull we raised payroll and then come back and say it was $2 million more than it was the year before, and then Stoneface say it in the camera. So I am interested to see what they are pushing to. Mostly because if they're willing to get to that number, especially with the pitching and the price of our beers going up as time comes along with Cal, obviously Julio's locked in, but Cal, Logan, Kirby, Brash is going to be ARB eligible soon here too. It does start to become harder for them to say, because again, when Garber and Haniger come off the books at the end of 2025, no matter what, I mean, that's $30 million off the books. Like, yeah, ARB's going to eat that up, but still, if you're running a 160 payroll this year, I still think they're not going to go over 150, to be honest. I think there's ways they can be cheap and get that roster very, very low if they need to and still have what they need. I want to see what he's going to push it to, because it makes it, in my opinion, in the window that they're in, with the control that they have on their pitching, it makes it really hard to justify going backwards in payroll. So if they get up to 160 this year, it makes me go, okay, 160 is the expectation until you blow it up. And trust me, I wish we had 160 the last 2 years. Would have made a huge difference. And that's how you technically transition into the next question.
Yeah, it actually does match a little bit. I will say that at least my answer to this is the outfield in general. I think having the year of Victor Robles is going to be really fun to watch, and we're going to have a whole year of Randy Arozarena and seeing what he can do. Obviously, he had some hiccups here and there was kind of words that like he didn't really take the transition very well. Starting for next year, he will have had the transitions done. So I feel like we should be able to expect a Rosarena much more fitting in to the team and the organization in the city. So I'm excited to see how that goes. Like you said, it does lead into the next question, actually, which is going to be a viewer question from Mitchell Hopkins on YT. Seeing what the Tigers are doing with the small payroll, is there any validity to the people who say, why can't the Mariners do that too? I will note that Mitchell did say that he believes it's because the Tigers have been getting higher draft picks for many years, whereas the Mariners have been more in the middle of the pack of that, which leads to better prospects. So basically seeing what the Tigers are doing. When people say, why can't the Mariners do that on a smaller payroll, is there any validity to that? So I'll go with Jage on this one.
Either give me a higher payroll or give me a new president of baseball operations.
Fair. Yeah.
I'm not going to beat around the bush on this one. No, there's no validity to the higher draft picks either. I'm sorry. Have the Mariners not hit their first round draft picks out of the park for pretty much the last decade? Yeah, you've had some hiccups. You've had Evan White that did not pan out. Oops. Emerson Hancock, again, go look at that 2020 draft during the COVID year and let me know how that draft went for literally everybody. The draft was a mess because it was impossible to be able to scout. It was impossible to be able to evaluate talent. And you were basically going off the stuff from the previous year. Emerson Hancock, and all things considered, still hasn't even really been that bad in comparison to the rest of the first round. Like, even with him not being, in a sense, what you should have expected to be the best pitcher you got out of all of your draft picks, if we're going by we were drafting the highest when we took him argument, it doesn't matter. They've hit on their picks. Hitting on picks has not been the problem. Being the problem has been the same issue that they ran into in, that 2015, 2016 window when they had the higher payroll. Yes, but they just weren't willing to go a little bit more. They were not willing to do it. And that led to David Phelps, and that led to Adam Lind. And it was not the pieces you need. It was that stone cold soberness that you felt when it said the Mariners were involved in the David Price trade and you got Austin Jackson. You were just like, what is this? This is not what we were expecting. So no, I do think there is a full-blown correlation to money because, yeah, can you sign bad deals? Sure. Are all free agents going to work out? No, it's not going to happen that way. But the Dodgers won 98 games this year without an entire rotation. The Braves almost made the playoffs without having Acuna for the entire year and having other key players. Austin Riley barely played the entire season. And when he did, he was terrible. They could not have had more things go wrong, and they were still right there and made the playoffs. The problem I run into is you see what the Braves can do, you see what the Mets will do, you see what the other big spenders. We're not expecting that, but when you have talented players and you spend the money to be able to fill in those margins, it gives you a better chance. God forbid things go wrong. If this team lost Julio for an entire season this year, they wouldn't have finished above 500. The Braves made the playoffs without their better version of Julio and without a lot of other pieces as well. So listen, you get teams like the Tigers that happen all the time. I mean, the Diamondbacks did it last year when they made the run. Sometimes it's just the right place, right time. And again, you got to remember, like, AJ Hinch is no schmuck. Like, we can talk about how much the Astros could have cheated their way to World Series titles and all that stuff, but it doesn't matter. Hinch is a very good manager and is a proven winner. It was a matter of time before Detroit was going to figure out how to win. And again, when you're having former Mariner great Will Vest throw 5 shutout innings in the postseason, like, I'm sorry, that would be the equivalent of Trent Thornton for us basically deciding, I'm going to be a death merchant for the entire postseason. That's basically what's happening right now. So again, we don't need to be a $300 million team to be able to win. But if you cannot win within the constraints that are part of the job, you cannot be here. And that is my problem. And again, I don't want to hear about other GMs who have done more with less, because we all know the story and we all get it. It happens. We've also been going at this for 9 years. And there's no justification for one playoff appearance, regardless of how the wins have been for the last 4 years. That's also an example of, well, those extra couple of wins could have come from, I don't know, signing literally anyone, not AJ Pollock and Tommy La Stella. Again, we liked Polanco and Garver. I feel like that was a pretty universal agreement in the offseason. But it didn't work. It doesn't mean you shouldn't stop, or it doesn't mean you should stop spending because it didn't work.
Yep.
Okay. Going on to Connor.
Yeah, what I'll say is that if they want to be as competitive as they can and extend their runway for as long as they can, then they absolutely do need to spend more as these guys get deeper into their rookie contracts and into arbitration. Hopefully you sign some of these guys to long-term deals. You do need to spend more money. In the same light, personally, I think that the Mariners have done a great job of scouting, developing, drafting, and trading for the most part. And, if they go the route of keeping payroll low and continuing to trade guys as they get expensive, then that's the way that they go about it. I hope that they, at that point, it's like you need new ownership. You need someone that's willing to spend the money to get it done. But in the same light, I do think they've done a good job of scouting and developing and trading. So.
Yep. Okay. Moving on, Sean.
In the Mariners, specific circumstance, yes, it is necessary for them to spend more. I think that Jerry and Stanton are a horrible match. Like, because Jerry needs a bigger budget. I think what he sold to Stanton was, I can do it cheaper, and he can't. He doesn't have the ability to. He has got the ability of building a wicked farm system time and time again. He's got an ability of building assets, but turning that into a sustainable winner, which was his, that's what he got him in trouble last year, right? Was the 54%. We're building a sustainable model, and he's not able to do it with the budget that he's given. So, I'm looking at a guy like, Bregman sitting there. You put Bregman on the 2024 Mariners, I mean, holy crap, we're cooking. And that's what this team needs to push it over the top. And it's frustrating because the whole narrative that Jerry DiPoto, the 54% thing, I actually don't think that the 54% thing is all that terrible of a thing to say. Now, should he have said it? No. But the concept, and this is where the Tigers come into play, is you get into the playoffs, it turns into March Madness real fast. And you got Cinderella's knocking off one seeds. It happens every year. And there is the reality of if you make the playoffs 10 years in a row, like Jerry DiPoto said, you are probably going to win a World Series. The problem is we're not making the playoffs. So we need to change the calculus because this is not working. And we need to we need to raise payroll, get better players. We need to get better. And I think a lot of Mariners fans get caught up in the payroll. I'm not paying their salaries. I don't care. I just want to get better. I just want a better baseball team. I want a team that we start the next season and the other, 29 teams are going, "Oh crap. Look what the Mariners put together." I don't care what the number is. I don't care what the payroll is. I just want that team. So that's what I got.
Okay, moving on, Patrick.
Yeah, a couple things about this. I think first of all with the Tigers, I think AJ Hinch is a huge part of what they've accomplished. He's a phenomenal manager. I'd say he's top 5 easily, if not like 1 or 2 in the league, and he's proved that, and he's a proven winner with what he was able to do with the early Astros. Obviously some shenanigans involved, and he paid the price for that, but he's come back with this I mean, under talented to say the least Tigers squad, and they have absolutely kicked way above their level for the last 2 months. And yeah, I think vibes is also a huge part of it. I mean, you can't have a team of guys that have never been there and never done that believe that they can beat anybody on across the diamond on a given night like this, like they've been playing for the last 2 months, without tremendous self-belief instilled in them from the top down. And the Mariners had that in 2022. They don't have that right now. And I think some of what the toxic behavior from the top of the organization has spoiled a lot of that. And I mean, you've seen it, examples of it time and time again, of the restrictions from ownership and some of the commentary from Jerry in getting in the way of positive feeling in the clubhouse. So, I mean, I think that's definitely something that's been the Tigers' formula that the Mariners just don't have at the moment. In terms of payroll, I think it's too late to magically raise the payroll. Like if you told me that the Mariners are going into next season with a payroll of $200 million, I mean, that would be excellent. I would hope that they would try to like just throw god tier money at Alex Bregman if you could guarantee me that contract wouldn't hurt the team at any point because you're committed to carrying that contract for as long as it makes sense. But I think they've needed to have the payroll in that range 180 minimum for the last 3 years, and their inability to do that has them so far behind, and now facing these windows where these free agents are just not very sure thing positively impact the team and take it to the next level type guys. So I think the payroll absolutely needs to be at a point where the Mariners do not have to make moves that make their franchise less valuable from an organizational standpoint by attaching prospects to get rid of salaries to be able to have the maneuverability to improve the team. I think as long as it's above that, they should be able to succeed in the current context. But I mean, they've missed the boat on raising payroll. I mean, the 2020, 2021, and 2022 free agency classes were all, or post those seasons, I should say. So not last year and not this year, were all awesome free agency classes that they could have competed in, and they just did not because of both ownership frugality and the place where the plan was. And the Rangers showed you perfectly that You do not need to be there to have the big free agent contracts pay off. And they got Seager, they got Simeon, they sucked the first year that they were on the team, and then they won the World Series the next year with those two guys leading them the whole way. So the Mariners missed the boat on payroll, but yes, payroll should absolutely be 180 million minimum.
Again, to your point about the 200 million number.
Yeah.
Like, listen, we're going to call it a real free agency and not a faux free agency, because I don't think anybody expected Ohtani to sign anywhere other than the Dodgers. I think that's just a straight up fact.
For sure. But I mean, again,
Juan Soto has no allegiances. If they win the World Series in New York this year, I think there's a possibility that he would re-sign. I think the Nationals are very intriguing. But the fact that you've essentially said, yeah, we're not interested in a hitter younger than Bryce Miller, who's the best damn hitter on the planet, and you could have him and Julio for the next 15 years, and you're not even considering it.
Yeah, well, the problem is it eats itself, right? When you remove yourself from one free agent cycle, free agents assume that you are not
interested.
And they're not interested. And if you don't consistently come to the table year after year with we can spend $50 million in free agency, and couple that with you have the worst ballpark to hit in the league right now, based on, various factors. But you can't suddenly show up tomorrow with $50 million extra to spend and compete for Alex Bregman, because Alex Bregman's just not going to give you the time of day.
Yep. Okay, moving on to Brady.
Look, man, the Tigers are great for baseball, right? It's great for baseball that, another fan base is engaged. It's great for baseball that there are multiple teams that can kind of come out of nowhere or can sneak up on you, or you're never really out of it. That's great for baseball. That's great for fans. That's great for fan bases that are used to being out of it by June. That said, I would like the Mariners to go out of their way to build a 92 win roster. When we see the Zips and Pacoda projections in February, I would like the Mariners to read 92 wins. So you know what? If they get a little bit lucky, they win 95, and 95 is winning the division. If they're a little bit unlucky and slip, they win 88, and 88 makes you the playoffs. What I am tired of doing is them building 84 win rosters and hoping to hit a little bit higher than that and get to 86 or 87, which it sometimes gets in and sometimes doesn't. Like, build a 92 win roster. So 3 wins above, you're winning the division. 3 wins below, you're the number 1 wild card team. I'm tired of the 84 win projections that end up with like, well, hey, maybe it's 81 or maybe it's 86, and neither one of those are good enough in most years.
Yeah. I think what they do a lot too is they'll build the 84 win team and keep their fingers crossed that the deadline pushes them over the top, and by that time it's too late.
And you know what's so crazy too is like, and I haven't done any crunching of numbers on this, but like, since the extra inning rules changed, like, just there's so much flukiness that happens over the course of a season. Like,
yeah,
I feel like in 23, the Mariners lost like every extra inning game they play. And I know they actually didn't, but like, it feels that way. Or they had like 11 walk-off losses this year or something like that. There's so much flukiness that happens with the way baseball is now that even if you're projected to win 84, you end up going 1-11 in extras one year, or 11-1 in extras one year, and everything totally spins on its head.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I definitely agree. With the Tigers and with the D-backs last year, it's just a matter of, it kind of reinforces the fact for me that just get in the playoffs and then things can happen. Like you might be going up against the Yankees in the first round, like you could win it and then you'll be on to the next round. It's just if you can just get into October still playing baseball, anything can happen, and that's where we want to be. Now, if we get eliminated first round, so be it. If we get eliminated second round, whatever. But there's going to be that year where we make a pretty good push and, hopefully finally actually see a World Series, which we still have not done yet. So, yeah, that's kind of, I agree with Brady, basically. It's just you got to start building in a way where you are more or less a shoe-in just about every year unless something goes catastrophically wrong. And we can do it too. I said this in a video just a little bit ago about, with John Stanton and his comments for whoever was, I think it was Kramer, about being a mid-market team or a whatever. You made the second most money in all of baseball in operational income. You were only beaten out by the Baltimore Orioles. The Padres, teams like the Mets, their operational income was like negative $200 million. So it's just, that's my problem is you may be a mid-market team. You certainly are not raking in mid-market team money. So I don't understand why that can't be reinvested back into the things that matter. But, it's not a question for me to answer. Last question. This is once again a viewer question. Search for Honors asked, who is our under the radar trade target this offseason? So yeah, I guess we'll start out with that. We'll start with Jage on that one.
I mean, I've proposed already way too many trades for being this early in the offseason, but hey, we're going to keep that going regardless. No, if I was going to go really, really like deep dive on what I think could make sense. So if one Urias didn't work, what if we tried to go with a different Urias? So Ramon Urias,
Yeah, I saw that
coming off a 115
wow.
WRC plus, 106 and 22, 99 and 23. Listen, he's 30. He's got 3 years of ARB eligibility. But what's interesting here is he offers you third base, played 3 games at second, played 2 games at first, and he hits lefties, which, you kind of sit there and you go, okay, what if they decide to invest at first base, right? Like, let's say that they want to go get Santander and they decide that they're going to play him at first base, hypothetical, right? You're probably locked into Josh Rojas then. Like you were going to have Josh Rojas on your roster because you probably can't afford to look for more at third base with you investing that money. Looking for a right-handed bat to go with Josh Rojas, again, similar to how Luis Urias was. But again, what Urias also offers you is, what if you have an open second base job competition between him, Ryan Bliss, and Cole Young? Urias might make the roster over that. There's also nothing saying you couldn't carry Urias and Cole Young, and have him kind of platoon back and forth between Rojas and Cole Young, pending on who shows some sort of ineptitude for being able to hit. So I think he's a very, very deep dive kind of ad, but he kind of fits the idea of what they want to do, right? They're still going to platoon whether we like it or not. That's not going to go anywhere. At least give me a guy that's going to be able to potentially do it at multiple locations. And if you're going to actually invest and it ends up being at first base or at DH or potentially even in the outfield and moving one of your outfielders to a DH role, it does make a lot of sense for you to go find a player with defensive flexibility in the infield who can hit left-handed pitching, because it's just not something you have on the roster right now. So I would say he's probably my deepest dive that I can do. And for, a concept of what that would cost, I mean, to be honest, Baltimore probably asked for Emerson Hancock, something along those lines. Like, again, Baltimore's desperate for pitching. They're going to be looking for it this offseason, whether it's bringing back Burns or going and getting Flaherty or whoever else to be able to fill into their rotation. That also might eat up their money. We know they have new ownership. We don't know how that ownership plans to spend. So something like Ramon Urias, who he's great for them for a depth piece, but in reality, like, okay, you have Westberg, you have Henderson, you have Holiday, you have Mayo. Like, you've got more dudes in the minor league that are coming up for them as well. You've got Mountcastle, O'Hearn, I think, is a free agent, but they're loaded in the infield. And if they're not going to be willing to discuss the names we would probably like to talk about, this is a lower tiered option that could still fit very well on your roster and comes with 3 years of control. But again, he's 30, so the 3 years of control might not necessarily be that important, just because he could tank and he might not be an ARB option in a year.
Okay. We'll move on to Brady.
Look, bring me any of the Red Sox guys. It's really that simple. If they're going to trade pitching, which I know we don't want to, I know it's plan Z, but the Red Sox need it if the Mariners are going to do it. Tristan Casas to play first base, Roman Anthony, the top prospect in baseball, to come in and be an outfielder of the future. Marcelo Meyer, who they don't seem to need right now at the moment as a middle infielder, as a top prospect. I want Cedon Rafaela. They probably won't trade him. Jaron Duran, if they want to get rid of him, I'd take him too. So any of the Red Sox players that they seem to have positional redundancy on, and Casas, I'd be interested in any or all of them.
Okay, we'll move on to Sean.
All right, I got two. One I'll make very brief. We know that the Diamondbacks and the Mariners love a good old-fashioned salary swap. So what if we take on Jordan Montgomery and we give them Mitch Haniger? Their contracts don't line up equally, but I think this is about a $7 million difference. But we know the Diamondbacks do not like Jordan Montgomery. And I tell you what, you put him in T-Mobile, maybe things flip. I'm just saying, that could be something that is a possibility. Is it realistic? Probably not. But a more serious note, I think that there's a world where we trade for Noelvi Marte. I think that the Reds have a lot of infielders that all need to play, and Noelvi Marte could be sitting there as somebody that could be got. I wonder if they'd be interested in Harry Ford. I mean, Stevenson's getting old for their catcher. I wonder if they'd be interested in him. We've got Garcia, we've got Logan Evans, that maybe the Reds would be interested in. You package them together with a guy like a Harry Ford. Maybe you're able to get a Noelvi Marte as your third baseman of the future. It's a possibility.
Okay, moving on to Patrick.
Okay, so I decided to go under the radar. So and I want to qualify this as I do not want them to trade for this player because I do not think he's very good, but he seems like the kind of player that they would trade for.
I'll
Okay.
do it. Do
And
it.
the name that I bring you is Brett Beatty. Who has been terrible as a major leaguer, terrible, just really bad. Like has played in parts of 3 seasons and has never posted a 650 OPS. Good defender, first round pick. Jerry Dipoto loves first round picks. There's nothing Jerry Dipoto loves more than a first round pick who hasn't panned out. And Brett Beatty's a first round pick. He did not make the Mets playoff roster. He was in AAA towards the end of the season. He's had a lot of injury issues up and down. Just has not worked out with the Mets. There's no room for him on the Mets. The Mets are always in need of additional win now type things. They would probably take I don't know who's a reliever. I don't know. Do they need a lefty reliever?
Salcedo. Yep, there you
Salcedo,
go.
yeah, or something like that. Give them one of the bullpen guys that have a bunch of control that you don't want to pay $2 to $3 million for because you can't pay $2 to $3 million to 5 different kind of relievers like they're kind of facing the plan for. I don't know, throw in something crappy. The Mets have no place for Brett Beatty. They've got Acuna now as their versatile backup infielder. They've got Jeff McNeil. They've got guys that play all over the infield now.
That Austin Roth
totally
trade
realistic.
is so hard.
I would hate that so much.
I would hate it so much. I hate it so much.
Again,
Yeah.
Brett Beatty, probably not any good. Maybe he's totally
He's
cut.
bad.
But that's
man.
such a Dipoto bet.
Is.
I
It
want to
is.
keep at third base. I'm gonna, even if they non-tender Rojas can probably play second. But Beatty's played a great third base when he's been in there, and
So bad.
Dipoto is the ultimate I can fix you GM. He loves former first round picks. Beatty has totally washed out. He's not going to be with the Mets. He's going to be cheap.
Yeah.
I don't endorse it, but I did 5-10 minutes of digging into who's playing third base on some of these teams, and he is such a Dipoto guy. It hurts.
Dude, it's October. It's horror film season. This is literally, you just described a horror film. Oh my
Brett
goodness.
Beatty to start at third base on opening day.
Dude, the fact that
I
is
just
the
love
most,
how
it's so realistic. That is the most realistic. This is a bad dream that you've just
Yo, let
created
me-
here.
If,
I don't-
if they can't
sometimes.
convince
Gotta keep
Philadelphia, Yeah, if they can't convince Philadelphia to part with Alec Baum, they are 100% going to go.
And I think Bohm's going to be expensive. I don't think they're going to want to pay what Bohm is going to cost. I think Philly knows that they can hold Bohm. And a guy like Beatty, who is, again, I do not think they could fix Brett Beatty, but he's absolutely just, the Mets would give him away. And Jared
I would
absolutely
honestly
obsess over getting him for free.
I would rather they give a minor league contract to Bobby Dalbec than do that.
Bobby Dahlbeck would be such a funny Mariner. I'd be so down for that. He'd be so bad, but it would be so funny.
Brady's got something to say.
I just love how Jage told us that we should go be getting Ramon Urias, and I'm like, and I'm listening to him say it, and he goes, "Well, he's 30. He plays second. He can play third. He also hits lefties." I'm like, so basically, Dylan Moore part 2.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of, I know that you had mentioned Kim. We have Dylan Moore at home, buddy. We don't need Kim. We don't need to give Kim 15 million, 20 million a year when you got Dylan Moore, who's put up the same OPS over the last 4 years, has the same defensive flexibility, not as good, and at least has some pop, where Kim's F4 has been fully dedicated to his base running and his defense with.
He doesn't strike out. Remember, if you want to cut
doesn't
strikeouts, he does not strike out.
Yeah,
Is that
cut
the
strikeouts
offseason plan,
again.
is to cut strikeouts again? That seems good. We should do that.